Welcome to Uncommon Knowledge. I'm Peter Robinson. By the way, be sure to join us on Facebook at facebook.com/UNC Knowledge. Facebook.com/UNC Knowledge. Mitchell Elias Daniels Jr. is the 49th governor of Indiana. A graduate of North Central High School in Indianapolis, of Princeton University, and of the Georgetown Law School, Mr. Daniels served as an assistant to Mayor of Indianapolis and then United States Senator Richard Lugar. In the Reagan White House, where we met, Mr. Daniels served as political liaison to the president. In the George W. Bush White House, Mr. Daniels served for 2 years as director of the Office of Management and Budget. Mr. Daniels was elected governor of Indiana in 2004 and then re-elected in 2008. In both campaigns, he crisscrossed the state, riding in an RV or on a Harley-Davidson and visiting every one of Indiana's 92 counties at least 3 times. Re-elected in 2008, he won more votes than any other candidate in the history of Indiana. Mitch, what model Harley?
Well, there are 2.
Oh, you've got 2?
Yeah. There's an 04 lowrider, it's called, which is now painted to look like the state flag. Sort of the official bike of the state. And then there's a black 2008 Fat Boy.
Good. You live well. The weekend edition of the Wall Street Journal. Front page. The governor who cut his state down to size. Mr. Daniels cut spending, trimmed the state workforce to its smallest in decades, and turned a yawning deficit into a surplus with only scattered outbursts of popular anger along the way. He has emerged from all this with high marks from voters. How'd you do it?
Oh, it was very mysterious. I hate to give away secrets, but for you I will. We spent less money than we took in. It's an old, somewhere said, tribal ritual out in Indiana. Not to be too flip about it, it wasn't that easy. We did have an extraordinarily tightest state budget in 55 years. Spending for the 6 years that we've been on the job in Indiana is the lowest, I think, in the country. Spending growth, that is, less than 1%, which is about 1/3 the rate of inflation. So we just put the brakes on spending very, very hard.
And you had, in Indiana, the legislature is called the General Assembly.
Right.
You've got 2 houses, but together they're called the General Assembly.
That's right.
You had Republican majorities in 4 years of your 6? Is that correct?
Well, not yet. The first 2, and then for the last month we've had that again. But for the intervening 4 years, it was a divided legislature, which our Democratic friends were in charge of the House. Another indispensable tool, Peter, was that the legislature, whether Republican or divided, was kind enough to delegate to the governor the opportunity to reduce spending if revenues disappointed, which they did in a huge way. And we've used that authority really vigorously.
Essentially an impoundment authority or a rescission authority?
Which, incidentally, I've argued would be something that would be useful to restore it. Presidents of the United States once had such an authority. And I think if we're ever going to get that squared away, it would be a very nice implement for their toolbox. But anyway, it was between very successful, I would say, cooperation on the budgets we got, and then aggressive action every single day to look for ways to stretch dollars and spend even fewer than they voted for. We got out of bankruptcy into a strong enough position to ride through the recent difficulty without a tax increase. We're basically the only state not sitting on a lot of oil, gas, or something energy related to have done that. And
music to the ears of a Californian, where we're facing $29 billion deficit over 2 years. You cut property taxes but raised sales taxes. Why do you prefer property taxes to sales taxes? I mean, why do you prefer keeping those low?
Well, we thought we were out of balance. We thought our property tax system was working a hardship on homeowners, on senior citizens, and even on our business sector. And it was growing very fast. And so it's important to know this was the biggest tax cut in state history. So the revenue that a penny of sales tax raised was offset almost 2 to 1 by the cuts in property taxes. And on top of that, we capped property taxes, and now we've made this constitutional. So just to eat your California heart out, if you came to Indiana, as you ought to do really, and bought a house, it would not only cost you a lot less, you would never pay more than 1 cent on the dollar of market value maximum to own that home in property taxes.
Education. Andy Ferguson, in his Weekly Standard cover story about you, appeared this past summer, quote, school funding increased. You've been talking about everything you've cut. School funding increased every year under Daniels before the recession, and since the downturn, when most areas of state government have seen cuts of 25% or more, education has been reduced by 2%.
Yeah, that's correct. It's unknown to most Hoosiers, and unfortunately I think to most Indiana educators, but we looked recently, and Indiana, by a clear margin, devotes a higher percentage of its state government, over 50%, to K-12 than any other state in the Union. So we have protected education funding about as well as I think we could have.
You're not opposed to government. You believe there are certain essential functions, and in state governments, education is the primary function.
Public safety is probably the primary function, but right behind it, yes, we think public education. Now that's a function, which leads to a different set of arguments. The function is to see that the children are educated. How we do that is something honest people can differ about. The function is not to create a system, however, which I think over the years some people have confused means with ends.
Mm-hmm. Briefly, while we're still talking about your time as governor, you've got a couple of measures pending before the General Assembly right now, which I'd like to touch on just briefly. Quoting a speech you gave earlier this month, before our current legislature adjourns, we intend to become the first state of full and true school choice.
Yes. We've already achieved a situation in which any family that can manage it can enroll their child in a different public school district, cross district lines, no tuition.
When you say they can manage it, they're going to have to drive the child back and
forth?
They might.
Okay. They might. All right. And during this General Assembly, we were trying to dramatically expand charter schools, which is another very important form of choice. And then finally, for low and moderate income families who still aren't confident they found the right a public option, either traditional or charter, a scholarship that they can take to the non-government school that they prefer.
You're not using the word voucher.
I could. That's a common term for it. That's what it is. But I prefer to think of it as a scholarship that the money really is for the child and for the child's education. This is the point I was referring to earlier. The responsibility of the state is to try to make certain that every child can have a high-quality education, but we trust families to decide for themselves where that can best be achieved for their child.
Last item while we're talking about your time as governor, again quoting from the speech you gave in February, my proposal for, again pending before your current General Assembly, my proposal for an automatic refund of tax dollars beyond a specified level of state reserves.
Yeah. In a way, you can think of this as a very flexible spending limitation, but the idea simply is that we would decide when budgets are balanced and a sufficient savings account has been set aside, and that I'm open to what that is. Is it 10% of the year's budget? Is it 12? But beyond some point that we'd agree on, automatically any revenues left over beyond that would go back to the taxpayer. I think it would create a healthy incentive for future legislators to stop spending at some point so they could give at least a small refund to everybody.